By now you should have a reasonable idea of how the drawing coordinates function and how they are displayed by the ACS triad. You'll be working with these again in more detail when you look at how AccuDraw works in 3D. The next concept to examine, however, is the fact that view windows themselves have their own set of coordinates. This is important because you'll use the view coordinate systems to assist in entering dimensional and directional information when working on a design. Look at the illustration in this screen, which is a simplified view of a computer screen. Note that each view has an identical set of coordinate axes. The X and Y axes are parallel to the screen, while the Z axis projects outwards perpendicular to the screen. Interestingly, the axes of the top view are the same as the drawing axes, a situation that applies only to the top view. This makes sense. The top view is the same view orientation as in 2D designs. You can also prove this by looking at the ACS triad in the top view. Now, while you'll mostly use dynamic rotation, since that's the most obvious, there are times when you may need a precise view rotation. A couple of ways you can do this, and the simplest way is to use the Change View Rotation tool, which you'll find on the View toolbox. I'm going to go back to my previous drawing with my 4 standard views, and somewhere on the list of view tools is the one that I want. But I can't see it because my views aren't big enough to see it. So I'm going to maximize the isometric, which puts my actual view tools down the right-hand side. And the tool I'm looking for is this one, which is Change View Rotation. So I'll click on that to open it. And I see this dialog box. I'm going to maximize that a little bit. And here we can change the rotation of a view in 3 directions, X, Y, and Z. And we can choose which view we want to make the changes in. So for example, if I wanted to change the isometric view, which is view number 2 right now, I click on the number and select number 2. This tells me it's the isometric view, which I already know, and it shows me a diagram of my isometric. And now I can change whichever one of these axes I wish. I click on the axes that I want, and I can change in the steps that I have here. So if I change the step to 10, which will make it a little more obvious. And if I click the Z, then notice that the diagram is rotating as I click. And I can clearly see which views are going where, which does make some sense. Back to reasonably normal. If I click on the X, then I see it rotating in that direction. Click on the Y, and it rotates in that direction. This can get very confusing actually, but it is a way of specifying a very specific view rotation if you need to. Now, like I said, mostly you'll be working with dynamic rotation, as we discussed at the beginning of this video, which is far safer and far easier to work with. The other way of doing it is to go to Utilities and key in and enter RV equals, and enter a value for the rotation. Now, in this case, you can enter 3 values for the 3 X, Y, and Z axes, and you can enter a specific angle. Just separate the values with a comma. If you have no rotation in one axis, just enter a 0, or simply just a comma. A comma value will be read by MicroStation as 0. So play with both. Experiment by trying to rotate some of your views. Try both methods, but don't get too deeply into this because you are unlikely to be using it anytime soon. So I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to go into my view rotation and change this view back to an isometric. And we're back to square one, back to window and tile. And I see my 4 standard views again.